There is a moment you do not remember. You were too young, too small, too new to the world to have stored it in any language you could later retrieve. But your body was there. Your nervous system was there. And something happened. Something that felt, to the version of you that existed then, like the whole world shifting beneath your feet. You did not understand it. You could not process it. So your brain did the only thing it knew how to do. It built a rule. A deep, wordless, operating rule about how the world works, about what you can expect from other people, about whether you are safe to be fully yourself, or whether it is wiser, smarter, safer to stay small.
You have been living by that rule ever since. And the most extraordinary thing about it is that you almost certainly do not know it exists. Psychologists call this early relational trauma. But trauma here does not mean only the catastrophic and visible. It means any experience in early childhood where your emotional needs were not met consistently enough for your developing nervous system to form a stable model of the world. It means the parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable. The caregiver who responded to your distress with irritation instead of comfort. The household where love felt conditional, given when you performed well, withdrawn when you did not. It means the absence of things as much as the presence of things, and it leaves a mark that no amount of adult reasoning can simply think away.
John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who founded attachment theory in the mid-20th century, spent decades studying what happens to children whose early bonds with caregivers are disrupted, inconsistent, or absent. What he found was not merely that these children were sad or anxious. What he found was that they developed entire internal working models of relationships, unconscious templates built from the earliest experiences of being cared for, that would go on to shape every significant relationship they would ever have. Not as a choice, not as a habit they could simply decide to break, but as the foundational architecture through which all later human connection would be filtered and interpreted.
You built yours before you could speak. Think about what that means. Before you had words, before you had memory in any retrievable sense, before you had any framework for understanding what was happening to you, your brain was already forming conclusions about whether the world responds when you reach out, about whether your needs will be met or ignored, about whether closeness leads to comfort or to pain, about whether you are, at the most fundamental level, lovable. These conclusions did not stay in the past. They traveled with you. They are in the room with you right now. Researcher Mary Ainsworth, working alongside Bowlby in the 1970s, developed what became known as the strange situation experiment, a procedure in which she briefly separated young children from their caregivers and observed how the children responded when the caregiver returned. What she found was that children fell into distinct patterns. Some ran to the returning caregiver and were quickly soothed. These she called securely attached. Some avoided the returning caregiver entirely, suppressing their distress, as if they had already learned that expressing need would not be rewarded. She called these children avoidantly attached. Some clung desperately to the caregiver but could not be soothed, oscillating between reaching for comfort and pushing it away. These were anxiously attached. And some showed a complete collapse of strategy, simultaneously approaching and fearing the very person they needed. Disorganized attachment, most often seen in children whose caregiver was also a source of threat.
These were not just childhood behaviors. Decades of follow-up research showed that these same patterns appeared in the romantic relationships those children formed as adults. The avoidant child becomes the adult who withdraws when intimacy deepens, who mistakes emotional distance for independence, who feels a specific and nameless panic when someone gets too close. The anxiously attached child becomes the adult who overreads every text message,
who needs constant reassurance and cannot quite believe it even when it arrives, who loves with an intensity that sometimes frightens even themselves. The disorganized child becomes the adult who desperately wants connection and is terrified of it in equal measure, who chooses people who hurt them because hurt, at least, is familiar.
You recognized something in that list, perhaps more than one thing. The wound is not the event. That is the part that makes it so difficult to see. You may not have a dramatic story. You may look back at your childhood and see parents who tried their best, a home that was not broken in any obvious way, a life that had no single catastrophic moment you could point to. And still, the wound can be there. Because the wound is not what happened to you. The wound is what you concluded from what happened to you, at an age when you did not yet have the cognitive capacity to form any conclusion other than the most absolute one.
If a parent was inconsistently available, the conclusion is not, my parent was going through a difficult time. The conclusion, formed in the nervous system of a 2-year-old, is something closer to, love is unpredictable. You cannot count on it. You must monitor constantly for signs that it is withdrawing. You must never fully relax. If a parent responded to emotional expression with dismissal or irritation, the conclusion is not, my parent had difficulty with emotions. The conclusion is, your feelings are too much. They are a burden. Hide them. If love was tied to performance, to grades, to behavior, to being good in the specific ways the household required, the conclusion is not, my parent had high standards. The conclusion is, you are only lovable when you are useful. When you stop performing, you will be abandoned.
These conclusions run silently in the background of every relationship you have ever had. They are the reason you chose certain people. They are the reason you stayed when you should have left. They are the reason you left when you might have stayed. They are the reason the same dynamic keeps appearing in different faces, different contexts, different years. Because you are not simply encountering it. You are generating it, drawing it toward you with the pull of the familiar, mistaking the familiar for the safe. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, whose work on trauma and the body has reshaped the field, argues that the body keeps the score. His research shows that early relational experiences are not stored as memories in the conventional sense. They are stored as somatic patterns, as physical states, as nervous system responses, as the way your body feels in certain kinds of situations. This is why intellectual understanding is not enough. You can know, consciously and articulately, that your parents' emotional unavailability was not your fault. You can say it out loud. You can believe it in your thinking mind. And your body can still respond to emotional intimacy as though it is a threat. Still flood with anxiety when someone pulls away. Still shut down when someone gets too close. Still replay the old conclusion in the only language it knows: sensation, reaction, pull, and retreat.
The wound lives below the words. And yet, here is the part that matters most. The brain that encoded those early conclusions is the same brain that is capable of updating them. Not easily, not quickly, not without the particular discomfort of being seen in the places you have most carefully hidden. But the neural pathways that were carved by early experience can be changed by later experience. Specifically, by repeated experiences of relationships that respond differently than the original wound predicted.
This is what attachment researchers call earned security. It is the documented phenomenon of adults who did not begin life with secure attachment, but who developed it through later relationships, with therapists, with partners, with friendships that were consistent and honest and safe enough, over time, to write a new conclusion over the old one. Not erasing the wound, but teaching the nervous system,
slowly and through repetition, that a different kind of response is possible. That closeness does not always lead to pain. That need does not always lead to rejection. That you can be seen fully and still be chosen. The work, if you choose to do it, begins with a single uncomfortable question. What did you conclude before you had words about whether you were safe to be loved? Not what you know now, not what you would tell a friend, what the 2-year-old in you concluded, what the child who reached and was not reached back concluded, what the part of you that still runs the oldest software in your system, the part that activates before your thinking mind can intervene, what that part decided the world was. Because that conclusion is not the truth. It was a survival strategy, a brilliant one given the tools available at the time. Your nervous system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It protected you. It built a rule that got you through.
But you are not 2 years old anymore. And the people in front of you now are not the people who wrote the original wound. There is a moment you do not remember. But there are moments ahead of you that your nervous system has not yet had the chance to experience. Moments where you reach and something reaches back. Moments where the oldest conclusion gets gently, persistently, and finally rewritten. You just have to stay in the room long enough to let them happen.